Money FM 89.3. Best of breakfast. The bigger picture only on Money FM 89.3.
Thanks for joining us on Money FM 89.3. All right, we are looking at what's going on with global trade right now. And amid the trade tensions and tariff environment, global supply chains and trade flows are undergoing a fundamental transformation. So what began as targeted U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods back in 2018 has evolved into a web covering the rest of the world. So what are the implications for ASEAN and how can countries here respond? For more insights, we are joined by Aris Dacanay. He is the HSBC Asean Economist. Aris, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Ryan.
Yeah, lots to talk about when it comes to tariffs these days. Give us a bit of a snapshot. Where are we right now? How bad is it when you see all the uncertainty with the global backdrop and how it's been affecting sentiment?
No, that's exactly the case. Nobody really knows what's going to happen next. So from a rules-based regime, trade has become a deals-based regime where a lot of these other countries are lined up in the White House trying to negotiate a deal to be able to lower their tariffs and be able to, sell more to the U.S. Whether how things will go, nobody really knows. And it is a very uncertain time. And that, I think, is a bit wobbly because if you're an investor yourself, how could you make an investment decision under this very uncertain environment?
Yeah, it's quite an interesting backdrop right now when you have, in the past few months, tariffs coming forth. Now on the table, you have potential deal-making on the cards. So what is likely to happen? How can economies here respond? What can they offer?
So I guess let's put this a bit more into context. So we see all over in the news that ASEAN is trying to make what you call a coordinated decision, or at least a coordinated decision to negotiate with the U.S. as a bloc. Now, I guess the question is, will they be able to do so or not, particularly the ASEAN 6, Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, Singapore, etc., etc. We do think it will be a challenge because we have to look at how ASEAN sells to the U.S. Each ASEAN country sells actually the same thing. The number one export to the U.S. for each ASEAN country is electronics and semiconductors. And since you're exporting the same thing, it is highly substitutable. Now that becomes a challenge because if you look at these reciprocal tariffs, each ASEAN country is tariffed in a different way. We have Vietnam at 46%, Philippines at 17%, Thailand 30 plus, Indonesia 30 plus, Malaysia 24, Singapore at 10%. And with all these things, it's really hard to negotiate together because with the differences in reciprocal tariffs, you have other countries benefiting and other countries who are a bit more challenged. And you could see the Philippines, for instance, and Malaysia with a lower tariff rate gaining more U.S. market share at the loss of, let's say, Thailand and Vietnam. So it's hard to make a coordinated deal here.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's a case of different and sometimes even competing agendas at play here because, like you mentioned, different tariff rates on different countries. So is this likely to mean the dynamics between ASEAN countries could change when it comes to cooperation?
Yeah, so I do think the role here is still to coordinate further, but the kind of coordination will be a bit different. The challenge here is to drive up domestic economies within the ASEAN region. You have big consumers. You have Indonesia, you have the Philippines, and you have big exporters like, let's say, Vietnam and Thailand. If ASEAN can come up together to be able to take down non-tariff barriers, to decrease the transaction cost of, let's say, FX exchanges within the ASEAN region, you could expect consumer demand in the Philippines and Thailand, Indonesia, and everyone else to, buy more intra-ASEAN goods. That is, one potential where the ASEAN economies can coordinate and make sure to build that blanket of resiliency amid these uncertain times.
All right, so we have these tariffs on the table. What sort of a slowdown could potentially happen if these things start to have an impact on business sentiment? Are you penciling a recession in any of the regions here?
We're not penciling a technical recession to a lot of these ASEAN economies. I guess just one, Thailand in particular, mainly because you have three factors at play in Thailand. One, you had the earthquake that hit back in March 28. That was a tough thing. That was a tough event, tough natural event in Thailand, where you saw tourist numbers actually fall down out of safety concerns. But at the same time, Thailand is also in a very precarious situation because its biggest export destination is actually the U.S. That's another reason. And third, it faces tough import competition with China. So what are the top three, I guess, the strongest imports of Thailand? That's one, you have automobiles. They're the largest car manufacturer in ASEAN. They're the second biggest HDD, hard disk drive producer in the whole world. And at the same time, they produce a lot of our machineries, like our washing machines, our air conditioners, refrigerators, etc., etc. And at the top of this, who are the top manufacturers of these three goods? A big part of it is China. You have BYD, you have China being at the top of the EV supply chain. You have the number one producer in HDD is actually China, and of course, China is very good at making machines. Now the question is, will you be directly or indirectly affected? Yes, because if U.S. tariffs China, yes, there are news that from 145% tariff rate by the U.S. on China, it can be watered down a bit, but we can expect a high tariff rate. And with that tariff rate, China will be able to sell less to the U.S. Now, to make up for that, China will actually look for other growing markets, and I guess the best market to sell to is the second fastest growing market in the world, and that's ASEAN. And that would result to, let's say, a high supply of goods to the ASEAN region, which will be a disinflationary impulse to the region. With import competition increasing higher than before, you have manufacturers who are competing with China, Thailand being the number one, or at least the most prominent one, will likely face a tough time.
Yeah, on one hand, sounds like good news. These goods are going to make things cheaper for consumers, but at the same time, it would possibly compete with the domestic industries as well.
Yes, that's exactly the point. So we have to actually identify which countries in ASEAN will benefit from this, what you call disinflationary impulse from mainland China. So everyone would expect inflation to go down across the board. You have, let's say, the Philippines, whose manufacturing is more on the food sector, so it doesn't really compete with China. So being able to compete with, or at least being able to buy cheaper Chinese goods will actually benefit the country because your household budget will be freed up and you get to spend things on somewhere else. In contrast, Thailand will have to compete directly with Chinese manufacturers, and being a large manufacturing economy, that will give Thailand a tough time. How about the other ASEAN economies? You have Indonesia, Malaysia, and Vietnam, who are actually ingrained, or what you call, who's deeply ingrained with the China supply chain, and they actually benefit because they're able to import, cheaper inputs, assemble them of something of higher value, and exporting it to the rest of the world. So these three countries notably saw higher imports from China, but even higher exports to the rest of the world. And these three countries actually benefit from this, what you call overcapacity issues in China.
Yeah, I'm wondering as well, is there going to be an evolution of policy making when it comes to protecting domestic industries? Would we perhaps see some of these ASEAN countries putting tariffs on China just to protect their own industries in the same way that the US has done?
That is indeed a risk that needs to be monitored. A key word, or at least the key word for this, is what you call cascading tariffs, and we already see it at play. You have, for example, Vietnam recently raising tariffs on Chinese steel. I think Thailand also recently rose tariffs, or at least mulling the possibility of raising tariffs on Chinese steel. You have a lot of policymakers also talking about what you call controlling or regulating these shopping apps like Shein and Temu that directly import from China. So it is something that needs to be monitored. And it might be the case if we do see the manufacturing sectors around the region being challenged. It's a more sectoral stuff. I doubt it will be blanket, but it might be directed to specific industries that China is really good at producing. Now, the question is, who likely in ASEAN will benefit relatively more than others? And I think this is where things change. In the first Trump administration, you have Vietnam benefiting from what you call supply chain relocation. A lot of these, when Mr. Trump raised tariffs on China back in 2017, 2018, a lot of these manufacturers relocated to Vietnam and exported elsewhere to the rest of the world. Now, that makes the Philippines today an interesting case because during the first Trump administration, there was no supply chain relocation, or at least there was minimal supply chain relocation that occurred in the Philippines. Now, with the Philippines having the lowest tariff rate amongst developing Asia, you have a lot of these countries thinking of putting up shop in the Philippines to be able to sell to the U.S., or what you call the China plus one strategy. And a country a country that has thought about this is South Korea. So, as we all know, Mr. Trump won the election back in November, and the Philippines was able to sign a free trade agreement with South Korea on I think December of last year. And by that month alone, in December, South Korea promised a total of $1.7 billion of investment to the Philippines that will materialize in the second half of 2025. Because again, if you want to be able to tap the U.S. market and you want to benefit from the free trade regime in ASEAN, with how things are today, despite the uncertainty, the Philippines seems to be the top name in mind.
All right, a great snapshot of how things are changing when it comes to global supply chains and trade flows as a result of the tariff environment. And in conversation with us today is Aris Dacanay. He is the HSBC Asean Economist. Aris, thanks for your time today.
Before acting on the information on Money FM, please consider if it's suitable for your own investment objectives, financial situation, and risk tolerance. To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.